I actually have a lot more than one question for you. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions to start out, and I want you all to think just very briefly about each one. So first off, what would you do if you won the lottery? Is there something that you'd really like to check off your bucket list? Next, what would you do if you had to spend that money on your community? Is there some project in your community that you'd really like to see get done? And lastly, what would you do if you had to spend $1 billion on your community? Now think bigger. Try to think transformative. Now I'm going to bet that most of you have thought about that first question before. I think all of us have daydreamt once or twice or a couple dozen times about winning the lottery. Maybe you want a big house or a fancy car, or maybe you really want to quit your job and drink pina coladas in the hammock all day long. I'm going to guess you've all thought much less about that second question, but something probably came to mind pretty quickly. Maybe there's a street that you really want sidewalks on, or maybe you want a dog park in your neighborhood. And I'm going to guess that very few people here have ever thought seriously about that last question. And it makes sense that you wouldn't. Unless you're a city planner, you're probably never going to get asked this. And $1 billion really seems like an unfathomable amount of money. It certainly did to me. But what got me thinking about this was the beginning of this year when the Oakland Raiders were the talk of the town. Every night on the local news and just about every day in the local online newspaper, there was some article about the possibility that San Antonio could get the Oakland Raiders. And I kept hearing one number thrown around. It was $1 billion. That was the estimated cost in public tax dollars it would take to get the Oakland Raiders to relocate here. And this really seemed impossible to me. But then Las Vegas proved me wrong, and it turns out the number wasn't very far off, because they've recently agreed to a deal with the team owners that's going to bring the Raiders to Las Vegas in exchange for $750 million. Now, I was having a conversation with my family one night over dinner, and my dad said something really interesting to me. He said, "You know what? Great. Let's raise that money. But instead of building one NFL football stadium, what if we chose to endow the sports programs of every single college in the city and get world-class athletics at every school in town?" And this was an okay idea. Pretty good, maybe, but I really didn't care about that. But what was interesting to me about that is that he had his own idea for how you could invest $1 billion in your community. So I started thinking about what I would do. I was daydreaming about how I would spend $1 billion in my city and the change you could have. And as a scientist, I really like numbers. And so I wanted to see how the numbers actually played out. It turns out that 29 of 31 NFL cities have invested public dollars in the last 2 decades on NFL teams. The average, nearly $300 million. And this number's climbing. So it turns out it's possible to invest that kind of money in your community. So now I want you to go back to thinking about what you would do if you had $1 billion to change your community. If you thought about more public parks, our city could build 5,840 community parks. If you want more public art, we could raise our public art budget by 30,000%. In fairness, we could only endow a 1,200% raise. If you're a dog lover like me, this is my dog stealing the couch from my roommate, my favorite photo. We could spay and neuter 150,000 dogs. And to be clear, we could spay and neuter a whole lot more than that. That is the total number of stray dogs in the city of San Antonio. Maybe you're passionate about education. With $293 million, we could just about make community college tuition free for every public high school graduate in the city. We could become the most educated city in the world overnight. Me, I'm a scientist. I spend my days trying to advance and promote science. And so when I think about what I would do, I look at cities that did a good job of this. And Pittsburgh, they launched a program called the Pittsburgh Tissue Engineering Initiative. And with a relatively modest investment, $19 million over 20 years, chump change in comparison to what we're talking about, they saw a 6-fold return in federal grant dollars. Over 6 companies founded out of the program. And they turned the University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon into world leaders in tissue engineering. With $293 million, San Antonio could become world leaders in every field. And that's what I'm passionate about. But I'm not here to tell you to be passionate about the same thing as me today. But the next time you're stuck in traffic, instead of daydreaming about what you'd do if you won the lottery, I'd like for you to look around at your community and think about what it is that you value. And think about what it is that we value as a community. And so I'm going to leave you with one more question. And this time I want you to think long and hard about it and plan for it. What will we do with $1 billion to improve our community? Thank you.